to do something a little different. If you've been listening to some of my podcasts, you probably noticed already that I've done something different because you probably heard some music before I started talking. But I thought I would give you guys a little bit of what's happening with me in my podcast journey right now, real quick. And then I want to talk about a story that I heard, and it shouldn't take too long, but I'm also going to drop in a couple clips because I'm trying to continue to evolve my production abilities and how I'm doing all this. So I have taught myself how, throughout this thing, I have developed a web page, which I've never done before. I've learned how to get my own RSS feed, which I was very excited about, and now I'm on Spotify already and should be approved for Apple Podcast any minute now, so that would be really cool. And I have learned how to convert audio files into videos, so I have a YouTube channel. I've done all this stuff, and mostly just because I've been trying to learn so that I can really, share what I'm saying, but more importantly, so that I can gain some really important skills that may help me with other things, but certainly have helped me kind of continue to evolve this podcast. So that's kind of where I've been today. Most of the day I've been learning how to clip stuff and how to put it into the recording I'm doing. So this is very, very exciting for me. I feel very excited right now. And so the story that I'm going to talk about, or the thing I'm going to talk about today, is about a professor at NYU whose name is Mark Crispin Miller. And I heard about his story on another podcast that I listen to regularly called the No Agenda podcast, and which I highly recommend if you are interested in hearing news deconstruction, because they talk about all kinds of things. I mean, most of the time that I've been listening to them, it's been a little COVID heavy because there's been a lot, obviously, recently about COVID. I guarantee you that if you're not interested in hearing maybe some alternative theories and some different opinions, that you probably won't like them. But if you are interested in hearing opinions and different ideas, I definitely do not agree with everything they say, and sometimes they come up with some outlandish fucking shit. What's the word I'm looking for? Like theories. Like they're definitely, and sometimes they're just being silly. It is a funny podcast, to be sure. Most of the time, there's some, I find myself laughing at stuff, but they also, take serious the kind of stuff that they're presenting and what they're talking about. So it's not a podcast for everybody. I'm not saying that everybody should listen to it, but it's worth checking out. That's what I'm saying. And it's relevant because this particular professor at NYU is currently suing 19 of his colleagues that are in the same media department that he is. It's at NYU. I think it's I can't remember. Hold on, I have it. It's the, that's from this one. The Steinhardt, NYU Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development, and he's in the Media, Culture, and Communication Department. So, and so my kind of the backstory on what happened, just briefly, is that he teaches and has taught a class on propaganda for the last 20 years. And one of the things that he often does is bring in current kind of events, things that are happening, and encourages the students to look into whether this information is propaganda, whether it's accurate, etc. So, in one of his classes, he uses the fact that they're in a Zoom environment doing this class because of the mask mandates, and he talks about I think he said 8 studies that he presents to the students and kind of leads them through, how you dig into this. You look at who did the study, what school they're at, what associations they may have with, certain companies, and how those studies could be influenced or possibly have some have some there's a good word for it, but encouragement to have certain findings. And I mean, obviously I didn't attend the class, so I don't know exactly what went down, but apparently one of the students, who was also a student that like joined the class late, like she came into the class after the class had already began for the semester, not necessarily for that particular session, but as a student that hadn't been there from day one of the semester. And she tweeted, so apparently during this discussion, he opened it up to arguments and for people's comments, which she did not participate in that part, and then tweeted several days later about, or maybe that day, I don't know, that she felt like he was a harm to the students because he was encouraging students not to wear masks. And as a result of this, several of his colleagues wrote a letter that was pretty, in my opinion, like liable, like slander. Like they were saying things about him that could fall into that category if they were not true. Like, and since I'm just researching this, I look into this. He has a counter letter that he sent to them asking them to back down. Both of these links will be attached to this podcast, so you'll be able to see it. But what I found really interesting is that immediately his dean thanked the student for bringing it to their attention, and that there would be swift action taken for next steps, etc. Keeping in mind this professor has tenure. He's been teaching this same class in a similar style for 20 years. I did look on his Rate My Professor way back. There's definitely people who say he has a conservative lean, that he's not a fan of the CIA or the mainstream media, and this has been going on for years. It's not like he just came out of nowhere and started feeling this way this year. And so here I'm going to play a clip where he talks about the letter that was sent to his students without him being copied on it.
The next day, the dean, and there's a doctor who advises NYU on their COVID regulations, which are draconian. And the two of them emailed my other students directly without putting me on copy. First of all, making a ritual nod to academic freedom. They always do that. And then sort of hinting that I'd given them dangerous misinformation and providing a link to what they called authoritative studies from the CDC, which, if I had had a conversation with them, the senders, I would have pointed out that the CDC, until early April, echoed this consensus of the studies that I had, right?
Masks, right?
Right. Dr. Fauci was on 60 Minutes explicitly saying, people shouldn't wear masks. Anyway, Oceania has always been at war with East Asia, right? Mm-hmm. It's whatever the propaganda says you believe, right. You don't have any historical memory. So they sent them these studies and basically instructed them to believe those.
I love how he refers to the 1984 book when he talks about how we don't, that Fauci, recently as April, I think it said, we don't need to wear masks. And the CDC was also had that same. And it took in one of the articles I read, it took the World Health Organization till June before they switched over and said, yeah, you guys should be wearing masks. So I thought that was interesting. But again, I like that he said, I wasn't telling him what to believe, and he doesn't really expand on that a whole bunch, but based on what he was saying earlier in the interview, by the way, I'm taking these clips from a podcast called Red Scare, and I will have the link to the full podcast and full interview if you're interested. I definitely think you should check it out. I thought it was a pretty interesting podcast. Some of the things he said, I rubbed me in a you're a little bit of a wackadoo kind of way. Because it's hard not to feel that way when people are so, like, have such an extreme opposition attitude towards what we're kind of regularly being fed in the media. Even I come up against that, where I feel like, gosh, this person is a little bit on the whack side, even though I'm pretty open to different ideas. But his main point that he keeps trying to make, well, and so he has a petition online, he has a GoFundMe, and the GoFundMe page has links to both the letter and his response, his rebuttal, that I put the links into the show for as well. But his main concern at this point is that having academic freedom where we can teach our younger generation to think critically, look at information, and being willing to hear another side of it, doesn't mean that they have to agree with it or that they have to buy into it, And I agree with this. I agree with the idea that what we are, basically talking about is particularly in relation to COVID. Any kind of dissenting idea is being like nullified and shut up. And he actually covers that. He talks about the three things that really kind of he's being challenged on. And in this clip, he talks about his COVID heresy, which I thought was an interesting point.
Let me just mention the third prong of the attack on me is COVID heresy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I'm making people unsafe. And that's now...
In their Zoom courses.
Exactly, in my Zoom courses. I have been, and this may be a key to why this is happening, I've been a very busy, I almost want to say vector, but source of a lot of important information about COVID and possible remedies and its origins and the dubiousness of these experimental vaccines and the infectiousness of asymptomatic cases and the PCR tests. I mean, these are things everybody should know, but that the media has blacked out. Mm-hmm. So through my listserv and website, right, the notorious website, I have made a lot of this stuff available. Mm-hmm. And I have found myself suddenly to be a lone academic voice, or one of very, very few in the West, who readily provides that kind of information and invites other points of view.
So here again, he's talking about the fact that he invites other points of view. And granted, the information he's putting out there is probably being questioned a lot. And I know that some of you listening may be the kind of folks that extremely believe that Fauci is correct and what he says is accurate, and that the science, and I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't have your own beliefs. I'm not trying to say that at all. And I don't think anything is bad about feeling confident and conviction about what you believe in. But if you're so convicted, if you have such unwavering conviction that you can't even hear another side of the story without saying, conspiracy theory, you don't believe the science, no, you're stupid, you're an idiot, all these things. And if you've heard any of my podcasts before, you know that I talk about this pretty regularly because it's very frustrating for me. But the idea that we're trying to silence anybody who doesn't say exactly the same thing as the message that we agree with is very frightening, especially if it's happening at the level of a professor who is teaching our children. And I mean, everything I've listened and read to about this guy so far really seems like he's not pounding out his beliefs. He's teaching the kids to think critically. And I remember I took a class in high school. I think I may have talked about this on a previous blast. I don't know. But I took a class in high school. It was one of my favorite classes. It was called mass media. And in that class, I learned about how advertisement used like trickery and lying to get us to want to buy their products. They, we learned about the white coat law. We learned about, so my favorite example from that class that I always remember whenever I see it is the 4 out of 5 dentists say, and you're seeing a picture of somebody in a mirror where you don't see their face. They're not wearing a white coat or dentist garb, but the caption is 4 out of 5 dentists agree that this or whatever. I can't remember what the brand is, but the concept is that you can't have somebody go on the screen that isn't an actual doctor in a white coat and pretend to be a doctor giving medical advice or confirming something is true or something of this nature, and in advertisement. And so this is a way that particular, I think it was a gum commercial, I don't remember, but that this company used, and I've seen it. I don't know about you, but I've seen this happen where they have like a report of a dentist or a doctor agreeing with this stuff, but the people on the screen are like not in coats, they're not doctors. It's just a claim that's being made kind of openly without any real proof. We're not hearing it straight from the doctor's mouth, so to speak. And so I learned so much in this class. She covered, like, it really opened my eyes to the idea that the messaging that's coming to me, particularly from advertisement, but even from the media at large. We talked about news and sensationalism, and we talked about advertisers' weight in the way that they manipulate, the way that they talk, and the way that they inspire. And this guy, Miller, even wrote I believe, the foreword for one of Bernays' books. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Bernays. Edward Bernays. I'll put a link for him because I've only recently learned about him. He was an Australian-American pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda. Referred to it in his obituary as the father of public relations. Bernays was named one of the 100 most influential Americans of the 20th century by Life. He was subject to a full biography by Larry Tye called The Father of Spin. The Father of Spin. That was in 1999, after he died, by the way. He died in 1995. And later an award-winning 2002 documentary for the BBC by Adam Curtis called The Century of the Self. But it says his best-known campaigns included the 1929 effort to promote female smoking by branding cigarettes as feminist torches of freedom. And he also was, so he's done a lot. You can check into him more. But that one really caught my attention because I heard about this on another podcast I listened to called Mo Facts, which is another great podcast that I would totally recommend, especially if you're interested in hearing more about how the culture of African descendants of slaves has been kind of manipulated over the years. Mo does a really great job of deconstructing that and talking about that and bringing up some really interesting points, and he uses a lot of great clips. But so Bernays, he wrote a book called Propaganda, I believe, is one of his books. So he's a very well-known person who taught the media how to influence us. And she asks about him a little bit and asks if the interviewer on this podcast asks if he feels like there's been a big difference between since he wrote that forward, and this is basically his response to that.
And the technological apparatus on which it's based, I think, is even more hypnotic and arresting than previous media, so we're all online. I mean, the internet on the one hand is a great resource, or I should say has been a great resource for those interested in counter narratives. I've been saying this for years, that younger people who are used to the internet are not as reverent towards the New York Times and not as freaked out by the conspiracy theory meme, and are more receptive because for a couple of decades now, the other side of the story has been available just a click away. Even as we speak, that's changing because so much stuff is being deleted and blocked, flagged as false.
Right.
And Google has, and Facebook, et cetera, have a great deal to do with this, So as the internet has become more and more enthralled to a few private companies, we see the internet go the way of the previous media, which already were excessively dominated by like 6 multinationals. So all that has meant that it's changed since Bernays' day, but it is fundamentally the same.
So I think he makes a really interesting kind of point here, that the technology for a long time made it so that we could feel comfortable getting the other side of the story. It's just a click away. You can read all of the different angles and decide for yourself what made the most sense to you. And whereas now, particularly recently, I think, and he says this a little bit, that we're losing some of that because it's harder and harder to find stories unless you do go to like more extreme opinions, and that's hard too because I don't generally agree with any extreme, very super rigid opinion on one side or the other. I try really hard to get my information from people who have as little opinion in it as possible, but that's very difficult to find today. It's almost impossible in some cases, particularly anything that's super fired up. And then you go onto social media and you've got people who are making memes and, listing things and making accusations or echoing the kind of like opinionated information that's coming at them. And I don't blame you. It's, I'm not saying anybody's wrong or right. I'm just saying it's harder and harder to get information that I can make my own personal, like, a judgment about that doesn't come with an opinion or a bias or, in some cases, an agenda, But the one thing that he says at the end there is that fundamentally, propaganda, the way that we are, our feelings are played upon, the way that we are kind of manipulated by the information that we're giving is fundamentally the same and has been ever since. And so I really recommend that you listen to this interview if you're at all interested in, he talks about a lot of stuff. He talks about why the mask mandate he feels has been so successful, and and he talks about there's a lot of really good information in here, and he's obviously been doing this for a very long time, and he has a good breadth of experience to draw on of things that he's seen and talked about and taught. I thought it was incredible. But I guess I wanted to leave you with this question. Do you feel that we are more susceptible to propaganda and less willing to entertain ideas that do not fit the narrative we are comfortable with? Because that's how I feel like we're starting to get I feel like less and less conversations I have with people are very kind of robust, good conversations where we talk about some ideas and we agree on some or we disagree on others, and I express my views on it, and then other people express their views, and it feels like the more it's definitely on social media, those conversations don't happen. You get into like a beef with somebody on a subject that's just happened to me. I was all lit up about something that happened with somebody who was homeless, and the messaging, nobody was agreeing with me or supporting me that had necessarily, because my point wasn't that what he did is okay or this poor guy. It was like, we need a better solution. And all the kind of pushback was what he did was disgusting and wrong, and he should just be in jail. And my continued point over and over and over again is that solutions to problems that communities have to deal with in homelessness cannot be solved by imprisoning people that aren't really committing actual crimes against people. But I won't get too deep into that. But this is the kind of thing, is like the discussion that we were having. It wasn't a discussion where people were like listening to understand. They were listening to fight me. They weren't even listening. Sometimes they wouldn't even address a point I made. They would just push back and say something else. And so I feel that more and more these days, where the discord that I'm having with people isn't interesting and evolved and backed with actual supporting information and articles or anything. It's just opinion based, and if I'm talking to somebody who's super buys in and is all for all the whatever the mainstream media is pitching at them, then it's very difficult to get into a really good give and take conversation. And I have certainly felt that more prevalently in the last year than I have previously, even though I think it's been going on for a while. This last year has without a doubt made it extraordinarily clear that having open dialogue of different ideas is not necessarily something that is as encouraged anymore. And that's concerning. And so that's what I have to say. Y'all take it easy now. Hope you've enjoyed this. We'll talk to you soon.